First mammals. When the reptiles first began to die out, the mammals started to appear. In the beginning, they weren't very big or strong, and they had to keep out of the way of the hungry toothed dinosaurs. But after the big reptiles really disappeared, the mammals grew strong enough to take their place. But a few of the smaller reptiles still lived on, like the Champsosaurus, the crocodile, and the turtle. For a long time, the animals hadn't taken much interest in their young. They just dropped their eggs and left them to hatch out any old way. But after a time, mothers, especially mammals, began to look after their children and fight for them too. When this began to happen, the mammals had a much better chance to go on living, because looking after the young, when they can't look after themselves, is nature's surest way of protecting life. Most of the mammals were browsing animals. They ate leaves and shrubs, and liked a peaceful life. But the creodonts, like the dromaeosaurs, and the oxyaenas, and the patrophilises, wanted meat, and meat eaters always made trouble. The doctor pointed out the Orohippus, and said that they were like the small beginnings from which our horses came. They were about the size of rocking horses, and were learning to run fast because they had to get away from the fierce creodonts. Oligocene days. Another jump forward, and Bobby and the doctor saw that the grass was growing, and even daisies, and plenty of trees. The world began to look like our own world, except that none of our animals had come, except for the turtle. He survived because, though he wasn't good at fighting, he grew a thick, hard covering, a carapace, of shell that none of his enemies could bite through. And when they attacked him, he drew in head, legs, and tail, and was safe. That is why he has lived on down through the ages. But everything else had changed. The big grazing animals, grass eaters, had come. The cat family, animals like the Dinictus and the Hoplophonius, not yet lions or tigers, had grown strong and dangerous. The grazing animals, to protect themselves, grew horns, and some of these horns grew so much that the animals, like the Arseniotherium, became almost top-heavy. But they could still toss the cat animals around. Bobby was glad to see the monkeys. Not being fighters, they had to learn to be quick and clever. Necessity made the animals learn to think, and they began to be able to live without being fighters and without the protection of horns or claws or sharp teeth. That was one great step nearer to the world we know. The Golden Age of Mammals. Scientists call the Miocene the Golden Age of Mammals because life was easy. The animals spread abroad and raised large families. Birds sang. The frogs and peepers had been showing them how for some time. The grazing animals, with plenty to eat, grew so big and strong that they weren't afraid of anyone and could enjoy life. The smaller ones came to make up for lack of strength by being very quick and clever. Bobby noticed that these mammals by now had grown ears, some big, some little, and he had asked his uncle how they happened to get outside ears when the reptiles hadn't had any. The doctor didn't find this easy to explain, so he looked wise and said that, to a great extent, is a matter of chromosomes, genes, determinants, and receptives. Science again! Bobby let go at that. All the animals began to look more like our own, although none were just like ours. Some began to look like elephants, camels and rhinoceroses, horses and monkeys. Life moved on. Changes came. Insects began to multiply, and the world that had been so empty began to become a busy place. A Pliocene scene. The Pliocene was a time of great unrest. The weather grew colder, and the volcanoes began to erupt again. The turtles, feeling that severe cold was coming, began to move southward. The near elephants had become real elephants, and mastodons with great tusks. There were still many members of the cat family, meat eaters, who had never learned to like grass. In the great struggle to live, all the animals had to learn how to fight or get away from their enemies. The big ones, like the elephants, grew long tusks. The buffalo, deer, even cows, sprouted horns on top of their heads, and still have them there. Only the rhinoceros grows his on his nose. He has never changed. The smaller animals trusted to speed. Squirrels took to the trees, rabbits burrowed underground, birds flew away. Bees, wasps, and hornets could sting their enemies. All the different animals began to be more like themselves and less like others, what we call individualism. And the struggling, bustling world was almost grown up. Glacial times. The cold that had driven away the turtles became more intense. The comfortable days were over. Snow and ice and blizzards came, bringing terror and destruction. In this ice age, half the world was frozen for 1,000,000 years, and some of the ice is still left today. The animals tried to get away to the warm part of the earth. Some did, but many were killed by the cold or lost in snow and blizzards. Some were helped by the fur that they had grown. The elephant, the hippopotamus, and the rhinoceros escaped and have stayed in the warmer lands. Bobby noticed that the sloth still kept a big dragging tail, but most of the mammals had only bits of tails left. They almost got rid of them altogether, but they never quite did. He noticed, too, that all of the moving about had turned the old, weak, wobbly legs into strong and powerful ones. Animals and plants, too, began to move over the whole world. The doctor explained how once scientists had thought that the animals began to grow in different ways because of what they did. That the elephant reached down with his long trunk because he wanted grass. That the giraffe reached up with his long neck for leaves, and so on. But now this pleasant idea is considered all wrong by the scientists. Nature, he says, is sometimes in a great hurry. Then again, she is very slow. But whatever she does is very wonderful. Animals in the north. Some of the creatures grew thick fur and stayed in the north, or even moved right up into the Arctic Circle. Animals like the mastodon, the mammoth, and the woolly rhinoceros grew thick fur and drifted farther north. But when the food supply ran out, they could not live. We now know them only as fossils. The walrus, the clumsiest beast of all, found it useful to grow his tusks down instead of up like the elephants. His family still lives way up in the cold of the Arctic Circle. Seals liked it too, and the polar bears. The muskox, with his long shaggy hair, still lived up north in the Pleistocene and is still living there today. The bison, too, lived up there in the Pleistocene, but later he moved farther south to the Great Plains. Bobby saw the whales off in the ocean and asked his uncle whatever they could find to eat out in the icy water. The doctor explained they lived on plankton, a small floating sea life. Bobby began to think about the changes he had seen. The reptiles must have felt the world was their own, but then they had to make way for others, and so on, and so on. Even beyond our own world that we think belongs to us forever. Our times. Now, said the doctor, our story of so long ago is about ended. Here we are, back to our own times. Almost. Man is here already. Bobby saw animals he really knew. Elephants, zebras, chimpanzees, gorillas, tigers, wolves, camels, rhinoceroses, and the little turtles that he now knew had lived so long. These animals, and man, seemed satisfied with life, Bobby thought, and he began to wonder whether or not nature might be satisfied too, and never want to change anymore. Perhaps after so many millions of years of work, nature was ready for a rest. Bobby couldn't imagine a rabbit growing a turtle shell, or a turtle growing fur. He thought about this for a while, and then he asked the doctor whether any of the old animals would ever come back again. No, I don't think so, said the doctor. We have them as fossils in the museum, where you and other boys and girls too can see them and know about them. But nature looks ahead, never back. And what may come next, if anything, we can't even guess. The end.